My wife invited everyone to a family dinner while I was out of town. They decided the countryside property I spent 3 years building would go to her parents. It's family, she said. I found out from my neighbor. Exactly when I was sitting across from a buyer, the deal was signed that same day with someone else. When she drove up to show her parents their house, the new owner opened the door. I found out my wife had given away the house I spent 3 years building while I was sitting across from a buyer. Not a metaphor, not some emotional exaggeration. An actual buyer. I was at a small office just outside Dayton, still in my work boots, with dust on my jeans, and a folder full of documents in front of me. Across the table sat a man named Richard, a retired contractor with a calm voice and the kind of steady handshake that made you trust him immediately. He was interested in the countryside property I'd built with my own hands, and although selling it wasn't my first choice, I'd reached the point where I was done making emotional decisions for people who never once asked what anything cost me. Then my neighbor called. I almost let it ring out. I was an electrician, and years on job sites had trained me to ignore distractions when money was on the table. But Wade never called during the day unless something was wrong. He lived on the property next to the house, and the only reason he even had my direct number was because 2 winters ago I'd helped rewire his barn after a storm nearly burned the whole thing down. I excused myself, stepped out into the hallway, and answered. "Moses?" Wade said, voice tight. "You need to hear this before it gets worse." A cold sensation ran through me. "What happened?" "Your wife's at the house." I leaned against the wall. "Okay, she brought people. That alone wouldn't have meant much. My wife loved to turn everything into an event. A lunch became a gathering became a planning session. A planning session became 6 relatives on the porch with casseroles and opinions. But Wade didn't stop there. Her parents are there. Her sister. A few others. They're walking the place like it belongs to them." My grip tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about?" I was out by the fence line. I could hear enough. She called it a family dinner, but it sounds more like they're dividing up the property. Her dad was talking about where to park his truck. Her mom said the front room would be perfect for her piano. "And your wife," he hesitated. She said, "It's family. Moses will understand once it's done." For a second, I couldn't hear anything at all. The hallway, the office, the air conditioning humming above me, it all dropped away. "Say that again." Wade lowered his voice. "She told them the house would go to her parents. Not might, not one day would. The property I bought. The house I built. The place I bled into for 3 straight years while everyone else called it sweet, ambitious, maybe even romantic, as long as they thought it would somehow benefit them." I looked through the office window at Richard sitting at the table, patiently reviewing the preliminary documents. I had come there, half unsure whether I could go through with it. The house had once represented everything I thought my marriage could become. Peace, privacy, something solid and self-made. Lately, it had become the opposite. A source of demands, a symbol other people felt entitled to, a thing I was expected to hand over, because keeping what I built was somehow selfish. Now I knew exactly what I wanted to do. "When did they get there?" I asked. "Maybe 30 minutes ago." "Did she say I knew about this?" Wade gave a humorless laugh. "She sure acted like it." I closed my eyes for one moment, then opened them again. "All right," I said quietly. "Thanks for calling. You want me to do anything?" "No." I stared through the glass at the folder on the table. "Just stay out of it. But if they're still there in a couple hours, maybe watch from your side." "You got it." I ended the call and stood perfectly still. "It's family," she said. That phrase had become a weapon in my marriage. Her parents needed help with a roof repair? It's family. Her brother needed to borrow money again. It's family. Her mother wanted to store a few things in my garage for 6 months. It's family. When her father hinted that the countryside house would be a perfect place for them to retire someday, I'd laughed because I thought it was a joke. My wife hadn't laughed. She just stirred her coffee and said they've always wanted a place like that. I remembered looking at her then. They? She'd shrugged. Us. Them. Family. That was the first time I realized she wasn't admiring what I was building. She was assigning it. I went back into the office and sat down across from Richard. He looked up. "Everything all right?" I looked at the papers. Then at him. "Better than it was 5 minutes ago." He must have seen something in my face because he set his pen down. "You sure you want to do this today?" Before that call, I wasn't sure. After it, I was calmer than I'd been in months. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." Richard nodded once. Then let's finish it. The signing took less than an hour. That's all it took to end 3 years of labor and 10 years of marriage, as I understood it. I signed every page carefully. No shaking hands, no dramatic pause, just the clean, controlled motions of a man who had spent too long being treated like the least important person in his own life. When it was done, Richard extended his hand. I know property deals can carry history, he said. For what it's worth, I'll take care of the place. I believed him. That's all I ask, I said. He smiled. I'm heading out there this evening. Locksmith is meeting me at 6. Perfect, I thought. Absolutely perfect. On the drive back, my wife called me 4 times. I didn't answer. Then she sent a text. How long until you're back? Dinner started. Dinner started. Like she was hosting a barbecue. Like this was normal. Like I was just running late to the ceremony where my own work would be gifted away. I didn't reply. Another text came in. Mom made that roast you like. Don't be dramatic. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly her managing betrayal as though it were a mood problem, as though I was the difficult one for objecting to being erased. By the time I pulled off the main road and turned toward the property, the sky had gone gold with early evening light. The gravel lane curved through the trees exactly the way I'd planned it to. I'd cleared some of that brush myself. Every post along the drive, every trench cut for the underground feed, every porch light timed to come alive at dusk, I knew all of it because I had put it there. And near the front of the house sat 4 unfamiliar cars. My wife's SUV was parked closest to the porch. Her father's truck was beside it. I stopped far enough back that no one noticed me right away. For a moment, I just sat behind the wheel and looked at the house. It was beautiful. Wide porch, warm lights, stone chimney, dark green shutters. It looked like the kind of place people imagined inheriting, the kind of place they bragged about at family dinners, the kind of place nobody ever asked how many 12-hour days it took to afford. I got out and walked up slowly. I could hear voices from the front yard. Her mother was laughing. Her father was saying something about finally having enough room. My wife was in that bright, performative tone she used when she wanted approval. Then I heard the exact sentence that finished whatever was left of my restraint. I told you, she said. Once Moses cools off, he'll see this makes sense. They're older. We don't need all this space. We don't need all this space. I came around the side of the parked cars and every head turned. My wife smiled at first, relief flashing across her face. There you are, she said. You're late. Late, not betrayed, not blindsided. Late. Her mother crossed her arms like I was a teenager who'd forgotten dinner time. Her father glanced at me, then back at the porch with the self-satisfied look of a man already measuring someone else's property in his head. I kept walking until I stood at the bottom of the steps. Nobody spoke for a second. Then my wife gave me that tight smile she used when she wanted to make my reaction look unreasonable in front of other people. We were waiting for you, she said. I wanted to talk through it together. Talk through what? I asked. She blinked. Moses. No, say it clearly. My voice was calm enough that it unsettled her. Talk through what? Her father stepped in, chest forward. No need to make a scene. Your wife is trying to do the right thing. I looked at him. Did I ask you? He flushed red instantly. My wife lowered her voice. Can we not do this like this? Like what? In front of the people you invited to walk through my house, as if it already belonged to them. Her mother scoffed. Your house? You're married. I turned to her. That's the first honest thing anyone's said today. I am married, which is why I'm curious how my wife decided to transfer a house she didn't build, didn't pay for, and doesn't have the authority to give away. My wife's expression hardened. Don't talk to my parents like they're strangers. I stared at her. That was the problem, right there. Not the lie, not the betrayal, not the spectacle. The problem, in her mind, was my tone. You invited your whole family here while I was out of town, I said. You told them this property would go to your parents. Her chin lifted. It's family. There it was. The holy phrase, the excuse for every theft dressed up as love. I gave a small nod. And when were you planning to tell me? She folded her arms. Tonight. After the announcement? It wasn't an announcement. It was a discussion. Wade heard enough from the fence line to know where your mother's piano was going. Her parents exchanged a look. So did her sister. Good, I thought. Let everybody feel exposed. My wife's voice sharpened. Why are you acting like this is some crime? We're talking about helping my parents. They're getting older, They sacrificed so much for me, and I sacrificed 3 years for that house. You still have your business. You still make money. I laughed once, sharply. That's your argument? That because I earn, I owe? No, she snapped. Because you have more than enough and they don't. I took a step forward. Then buy them a house. Silence. Her father muttered, selfish. I turned to him. Stop it. Just stop. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself. Standing in front of the house I built while my wife tried to hand it to her parents, and somehow I was the embarrassment. I looked at all of them then. At her mother already picturing curtains in the windows. At her father pretending authority. At the sister who never met a free meal she didn't approve of. And finally at my wife, who truly believed this should have been accepted because she had declared it to be noble. Then a car pulled into the drive behind me. Headlights swept across the yard. Another truck followed, the locksmith. And Richard, at first no one understood. Richard parked, got out, and looked from me to the group gathered on the porch. The locksmith stepped out with a tool case and a clipboard. My wife frowned. Who is that? I didn't answer. Richard walked up with the easy confidence of a man arriving at property he had every legal right to enter. Evening, he said. Her father frowned back. Can we help you? Richard glanced at me. You want to tell them, or should I? My wife's face changed, just slightly, but enough. Moses, she said slowly, who is this? I met her eyes. This is the new owner. No one moved. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the insects in the grass. Her mother gave a short, confused laugh. What? Richard took a folded document from his pocket. Sale closed at 5:07 p.m., property transferred in full this afternoon. My wife stared at me like she had misheard the language itself. You sold it? Yes. Her father barked. To him? Yes. Her mother stepped off the porch. You can't do that. I looked at her. I already did. My wife's voice dropped to a whisper. You sold the house today? You were busy giving it away. For the first time since I'd arrived, she lost control of her expression. The confidence vanished. The moral superiority vanished. What remained was pure disbelief. You're lying, she said. Richard handed the paperwork toward her. I'm not. She didn't take it. Her father did, scanning the page with a face that shifted from anger to confusion to panic. This has to be fake. The locksmith, apparently deciding this was above his pay grade, quietly stayed near the truck. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. My wife came down the steps so fast she nearly stumbled. Moses, are you insane? No, I'm done. You sold our house out from under me. I held her gaze. No, I sold my property before you could turn it into your parents' retirement gift. You vindictive. No, I cut in. Careful, you don't get to stand here after trying to ambush me and talk about betrayal. Her mother's voice rose to a shriek. Where are we supposed to go now? I stared at her, stunned by the entitlement. Nowhere, I said, because you are never moving in. Her father crumpled the papers in one fist. You think this is funny? I think it's accurate. My wife took another step toward me, voice trembling now with fury. 3 years. 3 years we planned that place together. No, I said. I planned it. You decorated conversations around it. That hit. I saw it land. Because it was true, and she knew it. I was the one who woke before dawn to drive out and meet concrete crews. I was the one who spent freezing Saturdays pulling cable. I was the one who came home with cuts on my hands and dust in my lungs. She came by for photos, for social media updates, for the dream, not the work. You should have talked to me, she said. That nearly broke something dark loose in me. I should have talked to you, I repeated. You invited your entire family to a family dinner and told them the house was theirs while I was out of town. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, because there was nothing she could say that didn't expose her completely. Richard cleared his throat, awkward but firm. I'm going to need the property vacated. Her father spun toward him. You stay out of this. Richard didn't flinch. Sir, I'm literally the only one here who belongs on this land besides Mr. Moses until he leaves. That was when the full reality finally hit them. This wasn't a threat, wasn't a bluff, wasn't a marital fight that could be manipulated later with tears and group texts and accusations about tone. It was over. The house was gone. Her mother looked at my wife as though she had personally failed some grand performance. You said this was handled. My wife turned on her. I thought it was. I let out a breath through my nose. There it was again. She thought, she assumed, she declared, and reality was supposed to rearrange itself around her certainty. Her sister muttered, "Maybe we should go." Smartest thing anyone had said all day. My wife pointed at me, shaking. You did this to humiliate me. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. I just refused to be the last person told. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Richard nodded to the locksmith. Go ahead. The locksmith walked to the front door. Her father started forward. The hell you are. Richard lifted a hand. Don't. There must have been something in his tone, because the older man stopped. The locksmith changed the front lock, then the side entry. Every metallic click sounded final. My wife stood there watching, breathing harder and harder, and for one brief second I saw something almost like fear in her face. Not fear of me, fear of consequences, fear of discovering that maybe the man she'd treated like a utility, steady, useful, predictable, had limits after all. When the locksmith finished, he handed new keys to Richard. That image will stay with me forever, not because it hurt, because it healed something. The house was no longer a battlefield. It no longer held my marriage in its walls. It no longer belonged to the people who thought love meant access. My wife's voice came out thin. Where am I supposed to go? I looked at her, and for the first time in years I answered honestly instead of kindly. I don't know. That stunned her more than the sale, because all through our marriage, I was the man who fixed things. Broken outlets, missed payments, her father's generator, her mother's porch lighting, her brother's messes, her moods, her emergencies. Everybody came to me because I always found a way. Now there was no way. Not for them. I turned and walked back toward my truck. She followed me halfway down the drive. Moses. I stopped but didn't turn around. You can't just end a marriage over one argument. I laughed under my breath. One argument. I looked back at her then, really looked, at the woman who had taken my patience for permission, my silence for weakness, my work for shared property. This wasn't one argument, I said. This was the day you finally stopped pretending you saw me as a husband instead of a provider. Her face crumpled for an instant, then hardened again. So that's it? Yes. She folded her arms against the evening air. You're going to punish me because I care about my parents? I'm leaving you because you volunteered my life to prove your loyalty to other people. I got into the truck and drove away. She called me 13 times that night. I answered none of them. Instead, I drove to a motel off the highway and sat on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled faintly of bleach and old air conditioning. It should have felt like failure. It didn't. It felt like quiet. My phone kept lighting up. Texts from her mother, from her father, which I deleted unread, then from people who had clearly received the family version already. You blindsided her. Marriage means compromise. You embarrassed everyone. One cousin I barely knew wrote, that was a cruel way to handle family. I finally replied to that one. Inviting your parents to move into a house that isn't yours while your husband is out of town is a cruel way to handle marriage. No one answered after that. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. By the end of the week, I had a temporary apartment and divorce papers in motion. My wife alternated between rage and reconciliation so fast it was almost impressive. First, she told me I was a monster. Then she said her parents had pressured her. Then she cried and said she never thought I'd take it that far. That sentence said everything. She never thought I'd take it that far. Because in her mind, I existed inside a fenced boundary. Hardworking enough to build, obedient enough to surrender, hurt enough to protest, but never strong enough to act. She had miscalculated. A month later, I saw the countryside house one last time. Richard had invited me out because a breaker issue popped up in the guest wing, and he trusted me to look at it more than anyone else. Funny in a way. The first time I'd returned since the sale, I came back as the electrician, not the owner. I almost said no, but I went. The house looked different already. Not ruined, just settled, lived in by people who appreciated its bones, instead of circling it like inheritance. Richard's wife had put simple chairs on the porch. Wind chimes hung near the side garden. The place felt peaceful. Not haunted. Not tense. Peaceful. As I stood at the panel, tightening a connection, Richard came up beside me. You okay? He asked. Yeah. You built a hell of a place. I looked around the hallway at the clean lines, the trim, the light coming through the big front windows. I did. You regret selling it? I thought about that. The answer surprised even me. I regret why I had to, I said. Not that I did. He nodded like he understood exactly. The divorce took 7 months. Her family painted me as cold for a while. That didn't hold up. Once details started leaking, too many people had been at that dinner. Too many mouths. Too many versions. Eventually, the story came out as it really was. She tried to give away a house she had no right to promise, and I sold it before she could. Some people thought I was ruthless. Maybe I was. But ruthless is what selfish people call boundaries when they stop working. Life got quieter after that. I took fewer emergency jobs, started my own small electrical contracting company, instead of killing myself making other men rich, moved into a modest place with a detached garage, and set up a clean workshop for side projects. Saturdays became mine again. I started fishing in the mornings, cooking actual meals, sleeping through the night. It took time to understand how exhausted I'd been. Not from work, from being useful to everyone. One evening, almost a year after the sale, Wade came by my shop with a six-pack and leaned against the workbench while I finished rewiring an old lamp. You ever hear from her? Not in months. He nodded. Good. I smiled faintly. That's your wisdom. That's my wisdom. We stood there in companionable silence for a minute. Then he said, for what it's worth, you looked different the day after all that. How? Like a man who'd finally stopped asking permission. That stayed with me, because it was true. I'd spent years acting as though love required approval from the very people draining me dry, as though being a good husband meant absorbing disrespect gracefully, as though family was a sacred word even when it was being used like a crowbar. It isn't. Family is not a free pass. Marriage is not ownership. And building something with your own hands does not obligate you to hand it to the first person who says you owe them. I still think about that evening sometimes, about the porch lights coming on, about her parents standing there with that stunned outrage, about the locksmith handing over new keys while the sun dropped behind the trees. But the moment I remember most clearly is much smaller. It was the look on my wife's face when she asked, where am I supposed to go? Because for the first time in our entire marriage, I didn't solve it for her. And that was the real ending. Not the sale, not the divorce, not the humiliation. The ending was the moment I understood that my life did not exist to cushion the consequences of other people's entitlement. My name is Moses. I'm an electrician. I built a house in the countryside over 3 years with my own hands. And when my wife decided it belonged to her parents because it's family, she found out the truth the same way they did. When they pulled into the driveway expecting to be shown their new home, the new owner opened the door. Situational analysis. The house Moses built. This story illustrates how the concept of family can be misused to override personal boundaries and bypass consent. Moses's contributions were consistently treated as shared resources without his agreement, normalizing a one-sided dynamic over time. When the situation reached a breaking point, he responded decisively and within his legal rights, protecting what he had built before others could claim it unilaterally. The key takeaway: patience and reliability are strengths, but when consistently mistaken for unconditional compliance, they enable exploitation. Recognizing that pattern and acting on it is not cruelty. It is self-respect.